So welcome everybody to today's webinar with Mark E. Lane directly from Chicago. Nice to see you over there.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Bert-Ola. Thank you.
Yeah, we will have a great hour here with you and telling about your life and a little bit how you came into this field of impact investing, social enterprise. And if I would give the background on you, it would probably take 1 hour. But we are here really to hear about your life, your vision, and your book, the latest book, One of 35, The Mission-Driven Venture, Business Solutions to the World's Most Vexing Social Problems. And you have done, I think, written 35 books or so. And also you have served as a chairman for the state of Illinois Task Force on Social Innovation, Entrepreneurship and Enterprise. You have drafted or been part in drafted the L3C framework for Illinois and in US, I think, and many more things. So welcome, and maybe you could tell a little bit about who you are and how you came into this business.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that very gracious introduction. One is lucky, as I am, when one's personal interests and passions coincide with his professional opportunities. So over the years, I've always been very interested in entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial finance. I've taught those courses at Northwestern University and the University of Illinois and elsewhere. So that's one thread. Secondly, I've been very interested in corporate governance. I've written a series of treatises, not only on the legal requirements to which nonprofits and for-profits are subject, but best practices, issues of transparency and accountability. And that's another thread. Third, our law firm has a series of financial services affiliates, including a socially responsible, values-driven investment advisory firm, and that's still another thread. So as a corporate and tax attorney and master registered financial planner, I've been able to bring together entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial finance, transparency, accountability, and mission-driven investing, and landed at social enterprise and this evolving impact ecosystem about which we're all so excited. So that's really my story and how I got where I'm at.
To write your latest book, Mission-Driven Venture, how did you come into that, and what is it about?
Well, this is actually the second book I've written about social enterprises. The first was a treatise published by the American Bar Association. It's extraordinarily important to me that the legal profession and all the other professions get up to speed on the opportunities for empowerment of social enterprise, not only to field clients' questions, but to initiate ideas with clients who are appropriate. Well, the first book I wrote, that treatise, was really rules-oriented, and it was intended really for black and white law to attorneys and others. This is a book for a lay audience, and it's really a book of stories. It's about individuals who saw social problems they wished to tackle, but where in each case they encountered some problem, some impediment, whether it was financing or legal structure or governance or messaging. Each case they overcame that problem and now become a case study where others can be inspired and empowered by their example. So my hope is that the mission-driven venture will be widely used as a guidebook for people who are interested in launching social enterprises, for seasoned social enterprises, for nonprofits seeking to diversify their sources of revenue, for policymakers, for socially conscious individuals and foundations, and other stakeholders in this space.
There is a trend in US that, and I think all over the world, that the nonprofit sector or the third sector or what the name you are using in various countries, but that nonprofits are structuring their entities as social enterprises. What is the background there, and what do you see in the development in the US, for example?
Yes, well, there are too many people living on the outskirts of hope. In the United States, a developed, strong, rich country, we have over 50 million people living below the poverty line. It's a tragedy, and I know that tragedy is repeated throughout countries of every size throughout the world. Well, we also are facing fiscal challenges at the government level. So nonprofit organizations, NGOs, that are dependent upon government for contracts or grants no longer find that source of revenue reliable. Similarly, philanthropy is not up to the task of helping nonprofits deal with the growing populations they serve. So increasingly, nonprofits are pursuing earned revenue strategies, that is, developing for-profit businesses which will allow them to generate additional cash flow, but which at the same time will drive their respective missions. So they say crisis presents opportunity. Clearly in the United States that's the case, because we're finding more and more nonprofits of all sizes looking at social enterprises as part of the solution to the fiscal challenges they face as they try to serve their clients more deeply, more broadly as best they can. And much of what we do within our law firm is assisting nonprofits in helping them identify opportune social enterprises, whether it's in the case of building new businesses, acquiring businesses, working in collaboration with other nonprofits or even for-profits to generate a revenue stream. Typically, what we do in that process is look at two variables. One is the organization's core competencies, and the other is its underutilized assets. And those two variables, going through a very diligent, robust process, typically will allow us information to guide nonprofit clients about their social enterprise paths.
Mm-hmm. You also started, if I remember correctly, the Social Enterprise Alliance chapter in Chicago, and I guess you have followed from a very close range the development in Chicago and Illinois. Can you give
I'm very proud to say that I've had a leadership role at Social Enterprise Alliance nationally and launched the Chicago chapter in 2009, which was the first chapter in the SEA network, and today is the largest and most robust chapter. And it really affords members to interact with one another, learn from one another, collaborate with one another. And I'm very proud of the thought leadership that's exercised by social enterprises in Chicago throughout the nation.
Mm-hmm. When you have built this network and structure over the years, how has it emerged? How have you built it? What was a little bit, if you can go a little bit into how do you build an ecosystem like that?
Yeah, well, I think the ecosystem to me includes a lot of folks outside Social Enterprise Alliance as well, because it requires really leverage and scale, and it requires creating value propositions for all of the stakeholders that are necessary or desirable to driving positive social change. But with respect to the launch of Social Enterprise Alliance chapter in Chicago and its growth here, we found out something very interesting in the earliest of days, and that was, although then as now we have many social enterprises in the area, one, they don't tend to use that label, and two, they didn't know that others like themselves even existed. So our function initially was convening, bringing together and identifying social enterprises, however they may self-describe, and providing a platform whereby we can catalyze their efforts and ensure that the relationships among them are productive from a societal point of view. So we have put on programming on a more or less monthly basis of an educational nature. Each and every program, however, has a very significant networking component, because I'm a great believer that when you put people in a room together, they get acquainted, and the next thing you know, they're starting to explore opportunities for mutual benefit and to drive their respective missions in a collaborative way.
Mm-hmm. Do you have some estimate of how many social enterprises or social enterprise-like non-profits that exist in Chicago or Illinois today?
I really don't have a number, because I don't get hung up on labels. And depending upon how one defines social enterprise, we would either have a smaller or a larger universe of candidates. In my first book, Social Enterprise, published by the American Bar Association, I devoted significant attention to the varying definitions of social enterprise, because one might conclude that every business is a social enterprise using the broadest definition. After all, in all cases, businesses are obliged to deliver a product or service to customers and therefore society that some feel valuable. All businesses employ people. All businesses therefore create or maintain jobs. All of them pay revenue and taxes. So based upon the broadest of all possible definitions, every business is a social enterprise. I often ponder what would happen if legitimately every business, in fact, placed mission above profits. At that point, would all businesses be social enterprises? Or might we say no longer do we need social enterprises? In either event, I don't get hung up on the definitions and instead take a big tent, all-inclusive philosophy about engaging the wider community and making sure that everybody feels welcome and invited to contribute to the mission that we all deem so important.
So the mission is for you the main thing about the mission-driven venture. That's why you're using that term.
Yeah, that's right. I don't get, again, social enterprises obviously are the core of the book, but it also deals with social metrics for nonprofits, for businesses, traditional businesses that are now measuring their social impact. It's looking at impact investing. What are the different ways in which one can contribute to the capital formation of a venture that is mission-driven, as well as the structures, the L3C, that is the low-profit limited liability company, where I had actually drafted the law to support those entities, the benefit corporation, certified B Corps, and increasingly the ways in which nonprofits are embracing prudent business practices, bridging the cultural divide between the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector, and finding ways to reach out to others who may one way or another be ready, willing, and able to help them pursue their mission for their own self-interested reasons. So a lot of this really is finding ways to kind of package relationships, create branding, signaling, and messaging opportunities so as to engage the broader community, including those individuals or entities that are going to be most important to your success.
So for people who might not know about the L3C framework and maybe B Corp, or can you explain in a way what it is? What would it make the difference for a non-profit, for example, to have this legal structure?
Sure. And I'll broaden that question slightly to include uses of the L3C outside the nonprofit community as well. The L3C is a for-profit business form, and in fact, in the United States, it's the only for-profit business form that places charitable or educational purpose above all others, and it does so permanently and irrevocably by law. So in engaging stakeholders around a business mission, there is a solidarity that gets created. The various interests of different stakeholders are harmonized in furtherance of mission. Well, the L3C has a number of benefits. One of them has to do with capital formation, because the L3C's legal form tracks the tax requirements for foundation, that is, grant-making organizations that are obliged to distribute 5% of their assets annually for charitable purposes. This is what accounts for the feverish competition for grants among charities. What's less understood, however, is that 5% distribution requirement can also be satisfied when a foundation makes an investment in debt or even investment in equity, so long as it's primarily for charitable purposes. Well, the L3C structure tracks point by point all of the requirements for foundations that wish to make those kinds of investments. So one of the reasons that charities embrace the L3C form for subsidiaries or affiliates when creating businesses is that they can thereby tap into that funding source, that is foundation program-related investments. And often the foundation foregoes market rate returns, thereby allowing the charity to leverage that forbearance to attract private sector capital concurrently or subsequently from market-driven investors. So thereby engaging the private investment community, which I think is what the capital formation opportunity is all about. So when a nonprofit sets up a business, it will almost invariably want to set up a new legal structure to house that business for asset protection reasons. So the L3C, which is a subset of the LLC, that is the limited liability company, has the advantages of any other LLC in that it has great flexibility in governance, and it has great flexibility in tax reporting, but it also has this capital formation feature. And of course, there is a branding element because every L3C has L3C in its name. So counterparties, whether it be consumers or funders or strategic alliance partners, looking to the nonprofit's new venture as against its competition, may favor the nonprofit because of its mission-driven attribute. I'll mention one other point, Bert-Ola, and that is, if the L3C is not used, typically the charity would have used, historically, an LLC. The problem with that is that a limited liability company is perceived by the world to have a commercial purpose. So there is a disconnect between the exempt purpose of the nonprofit parents and the mission-driven purpose of the subsidiary. Well, there's no daylight between the two when the nonprofit has an L3C, because both of them by law are limited to charitable purposes. For similar reasons, freestanding, standalone, social purpose businesses are increasingly adopting the L3C form to ensure there is perpetual adherence to mission, to tap into capital sources, including foundation money, but also to send a signal to the marketplace that this is a mission-driven venture. And as consumers are increasingly concerned about businesses' motivations, particularly now the millennials are only buying products from socially responsible businesses, L3Cs have a competitive edge over the competition even outside the nonprofit structure.
So do you see this coming now? Does this L3C attract capital formation from the private businesses and the millenniums? Do you see that they are taking on the concept?
Yes, clearly they are. And we have a number of clients who have secured funding in this very fashion. Others are seeing the governance attributes even more important for them. And of course, this varies. The Kauffman Foundation here, for example, places great importance on the governance attribute of the L3C and has written in scholarly texts about the importance of the governance attribute of the L3C versus other for-profit business forms. And then, of course, the marketing or branding advantage of the L3C has an intangible value, but nevertheless a real one. So for all kinds of reasons, we now have about 1,500 L3Cs in the United States, and that number continues to grow.
Also very relevant, I think, these days is Mark Zuckerberg's gift the other day. Maybe you can take that as an example, and will that open up in some way for philanthropic capital into this field?
Yeah, and of course, Mr. Zuckerberg's step is controversial because he did not pledge his money into one or more charities, which would be the more customary choice, but instead is doing so through an LLC vehicle. Now, in my view, uber wealthy people of his generation are likely to be looking at the L3C for this purpose. He, of course, is sector agnostic, doesn't want to be bound by the rules and regulations affecting nonprofits, wants to be able to partner with nonprofits and for-profits and social enterprises, may wish to start his own social enterprises. So he wants the flexibility of an LLC. I would suggest to him and others of his ilk to consider the L3C as the better choice for that very structure because it has all of the benefits of any other LLC, but forever will be tied to a charitable purpose so that the controversy that surrounds Mr. Zuckerberg's gift would not apply and his motives would be clearer to the rest of the world.
It's very, very interesting. Also, the concept, at least in Scandinavia, I'm thinking Europe overall, that is put forward is social impact bonds. What do you see there, the status, and
Yeah, well,
what's going on?
it's really taking off at the national level as well as many states. You very generously mentioned that I chaired the Illinois Governor's Task Force on Social Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Enterprise. That was the last governor's think tank on issues of social change. I drafted the legislation creating the task force, and for a variety of tactical reasons wanted it to be term limited so that I could, when populating the task force, ensure that everyone's feet were held to the fire, and indeed that happened. We developed a series of actionable policy recommendations that were in fact implemented. Well, the social impact bond was one of them. In the United States, it's called Pay for Success, but the first Pay for Success initiative in the state of Illinois was incubated within that task force, and it is just now being launched. As your audience may know, the Pay for Success or social impact bond is not a bond at all, but rather what I describe as a futures contract on social impact. The idea is to have a social petri dish where various innovative strategies of intervention can be tested, and if they work, can be scaled up, and using impact investors' capital to try out these concepts. And if it works, they get their money back, and based on a formula, may make a profit as well. Well, the Illinois Pay for Success initiative is unusual in a number of respects. One is its transparency. We went through a request for information process where 31 different nonprofits raised their hands and suggested different innovations they would like to see tested. And for the very first time in any Pay for Success initiative, so long as I'm aware, all of those are online, available for anyone to see and learn from, because even if they were not selected or won't be selected by the state, nevertheless, I want to make sure that that information gets shared to the broadest possible audience so others may act upon it. So ultimately, the subject that was selected by the governor deals with youth at risk, both in the criminal justice system and in the child welfare system. First time we've had a dually involved population being the subject of a Pay for Success initiative. It's also the first time in the United States where we have multiple service providers all under the leadership of one very significant and well-regarded nonprofit called One Hope United. And it is also unusual for one other reason, and that is an impediment in launching a Pay for Success initiative historically has been it requires the legislature to do multi-year appropriations, which are very difficult to get through politically. Well, we were able to finesse that issue in Illinois and treat it as part of the annual budget instead. So we're looking forward to good things out of Illinois' Pay for Success initiative, but we're also seeing other states follow suit, and we're looking for good results throughout the country.
So what do you see as the biggest challenge, opportunity around the social impact bonds from what you know, from your context?
Well, these are very hard. When we were evaluating as a task force whether we should bring this concept to Illinois, I solicited a pro bono engagement from the Kennedy School at Harvard, and their folks came in and were very helpful to us. But they indicated to me for them to be involved, the governor would have to identify Pay for Success as one of his top 3 issue priorities, because it requires such a commitment from a policy perspective, from an implementation perspective, and each of these is sui generis. They're all unique, they're complicated, and the likelihood is, since we're dealing with innovation, many of them are going to fail. To me, failure is not a bad thing, because by failing, we know what doesn't work, and we can then not make that mistake again. It's almost like the sculptor who's creating a sculpture by removing the stone which isn't to be the sculpture, and that which remains is the sculpture. So I think every step we take in the learning process is of utility, but to sell that to a state, particularly a fiscally challenged state such as Illinois, wasn't an automatic sale. Yet I think our thought leadership here and the innovation, not only in terms of subject matter, but in design of the Pay for Success initiative, I think itself is going to be useful to other states and other countries as they evaluate the process.
Also, you have been working a lot on program investment and mission investment, and I heard that the Internal Revenue Service expanded its list on sanctioned program-related investment examples.
Yeah, so
what can that mean?
It means a great deal, and it means a great deal globally. Program-related investments are, again, the investment alternative to a grant that foundations can use to satisfy their requirement by law to distribute 5% of their assets annually for charitable purposes. This is the trade-off for the tax benefits they enjoy. Well, up until a couple of years ago, the IRS had not promulgated rules about, well, what are acceptable program-related investments or not since 1972. So the world has changed since then, of course. Now the IRS has promulgated a new list of examples. Interestingly, several of them include investments outside the United States by U.S. foundations. So investments in the developing world in specific have been called out as encouraged by the IRS. I think that is of great significance, using U.S. capital to drive positive social change around the world. Now, that's the program-related investment, and it relates to the 5% distribution. The 95% that's left behind in the foundation's coffers have now also been the subject of IRS attention. Typically, foundations have invested in a typical institutional portfolio, a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds, staying away from impact-type investments for fear that doing so could subject the foundation and its management to an excise tax for jeopardizing the exempt purpose of the foundation. Well, now the IRS has spoken, and the IRS has gone on to say, even if the proposed investment delivers less financial returns than some competing investment might have, nevertheless, the foundation as a fiduciary should seriously consider impact investments and will not be penalized if those investments fail to deliver market rate returns. So between program-related investments and mission-related investments, all of us worldwide can now look to foundations to make debt or equity investments in nonprofit or for-profit social purpose businesses. It opened us up an enormous universe of capital for the social sector.
What type of businesses could that be for people who are not that aware about the concepts here? But if you're an entrepreneur in Africa or India here, what type of business could that mean in practice?
Well, in practice, if we're talking about businesses, and again, this doesn't need only to be businesses, it can be nonprofits using money programmatically. But if we're talking investment and we're talking businesses, any venture that has a charitable or similar purpose, but also generates revenue. Without revenue, of course, you have no business. So let me give you a couple of categories. One, it seems to me, is education. So if one were to develop an online platform to educate or train or develop workforce in a given area, that certainly would qualify. Another may be healthcare. Here in the United States, we have Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which is creating all kinds of entrepreneurial opportunities. In fact, hospitals today have a statutory obligation that historically only banks have had under the Community Reinvestment Act, and those hospitals now need to put money into their communities in developing businesses and other opportunities to drive social change. But throughout the world, business opportunities can be cultivated around workforce development, around public health, around education, around anything that you see as charitable or scientific, so long as it has an entrepreneurial bent, and therefore the venture has a reasonable opportunity to meet its obligation, whatever it may mean, to the investor, whether that is repayment of capital with or without interest, whether that may mean one day a liquidity event or the payment of a dividend in the interim. Whatever the business deal that gets cut, the structure needs to accommodate that and achieve a reasonable opportunity to make that happen.
That sounds as a big opportunity.
I believe
Also,
so.
and also there, I think all around the world, but what I heard is that the U.S. Department of Labor in some way encourage wider perspective on taking responsibility into consideration in their investments. What's the status of that, and what do you see there?
Again, an enormous pool of dollars available for investment around the world. The subject matter is pensions. And you can imagine how much capital is tied up in U.S. pensions. Well, the Department of Labor regulates pensions under the Pension Reform Act, or ERISA as it's called here. Historically, again, pensions have been managed by institutional investors subject to very rigorous rules about diversification, allocation of resources, ensuring high quality investments, avoiding speculative investments, and so on. And for that reason, pension investment managers have stayed away from impact investments. Well, now too, within the last couple of months, the U.S. Department of Labor has opined that when the pension manager has two different investments before him, one without social impact and one with social impact, and there is a reasonable expectation that each might do about as well financially, the pension manager is specifically authorized to select the impact investments, and the Department of Labor calls that a tiebreaker. Where there is a tie, opt for the impact investments. So all of a sudden, we now have conversations within the institutional halls throughout the United States about pension money that can be put to work for impact investments, whereas heretofore that had never been entertained for fear that it would have violated U.S. Department of Labor rules. So we really have a relaxation of regulations, both at the Internal Revenue Service and the Department of Revenue, all of which is driven by market considerations. When the Internal Revenue Service promulgated its new list of examples of program-related investments, two very unusual things about that promulgation. One is it specifically said that this was at the behest of the foundation community that this rule was promulgated, not the nonprofit community, not the social enterprise community. Foundations want to invest in social enterprises, and they asked the IRS for this ruling, and the IRS obliged. The other thing that's unusual about the promulgation is typically when the IRS considers a ruling or a regulation, there is a comments period. Here, the regulation was effective the day it was published. So they wanted the foundations to know that they were empowered to make program-related investments in this broader category of subject matters without delay right now, and because you foundations have requested it. All of which is really a reflection of how impact investing and social enterprise are gaining traction in the United States as they are elsewhere in the world.
Do you see that it's hard to see the background work, but we had recently the COP21 here in Paris. It came to an agreement, at least we see now there will be a lot of action happening, hopefully. Is this related in some way? Do you see this could be potential investments in the clean tech sector?
I think there's no doubt about that. In fact, Secretary of State Kerry, upon his report to the media and the president after the Paris conference, specifically said the most important outcome of the Paris conference was the effect it will have on the markets. And what he meant by that, of course, is we're going to see all kinds of green energy opportunities emerge because of this new commitment by close to 200 countries. Some may see it as primarily a symbolic act without much teeth. There aren't enforcement mechanisms, there aren't sanctions. Nevertheless, the signaling is clear here in the US as elsewhere. The opportunities to develop businesses for clean energy are abundant and demanded by the marketplace and by policymakers. And we see that as an emerging category for impact investors, clearly.
Yeah, that's a good message then for the entrepreneurs in the clean tech field, I guess.
Very definitely.
Yeah. Also, I heard that the Obama Library is coming to Chicago. What's that, and what does that mean for social impact and enterprises?
Well, yes. At the conclusion of the president's term, it has been determined that the Obama Presidential Library and Museum will be located in Chicago, his hometown. And perhaps even more important, although the specific site has not yet been disclosed, it is to be in one of two parks, each of which exists on the south side of the city, which is among the most economically depressed. You may know Chicago has been the subject of media attention and a lot of protests over the disparity of wealth and power within the city. It is my expectation and the expectation of many others that the Obama Library will be an engine of economic growth in the city of Chicago and specifically on the south side. One of the things in specific that we're looking at is the creation of worker-owned cooperatives within the south side. Typically, when one creates a business, one does whatever business plan or lean startup might be appropriate, develops a product, develops a service, then goes starting knocking on doors, finding a customer, and hopefully gets lucky pretty soon. Here it goes the other way. We have a number of place-based anchor institutions on the south side of the city. We have the University of Chicago, which many have criticized as being in an oasis, that is, not having interacted sufficiently with the rest of the south side. We also have a number of museums, including the Museum of Science and Industry. We have the Illinois Institute of Technology. We also have the Lucas Museum, which is coming not too far away. So the idea is to identify the recurring needs of those institutions for specific products or services, and then pursuant to their corporate social responsibility agendas, have them commit to buy those products or services from locally owned, worker-owned cooperatives nearby. And the idea is now to have structural revenue within those ventures sufficient to ensure their sustainability, and on the strength of that revenue, going out and peddle those products or services elsewhere. But in the meantime, we can provide employment, indeed self-employment, for people who will operate those businesses in the south side, whether they be hydroponic gardens, whether for produce, fruits and vegetables to the hospitals, the university, whether it be a solar farm, whether it be a green laundry, whatever the products and services may be. Our hope is to create collaboration with those institutions and the library be the centerpiece of this sort of initiative. But that to me is one out of many steps that are currently underway to ensure the library is as socially impactful as it should be, and we have reason to believe it will be.
Fantastic. I see that the time is starting to run out a little bit here, but we have some time for some questions here for people who are following. So maybe we can take a few. We have one question there about social impact, impact measurement. What is your take on impact measurement and from your perspective?
Yeah, well, that's a really important question, because increasingly investors, donors, regulators, and other stakeholders are demanding that nonprofits and social enterprises measure their social impact. Historically, too few of them have done that at all. Many of those who claim to do that are measuring the wrong things. They're measuring activities rather than outputs that are reasonable proxies for social impact. The problem is that fledgling nonprofits and social enterprises are hard-pressed to develop the budgets to do this in a meaningful way. My advice to them is start. Start measuring what you can measure, demonstrate a commitment to social metrics, and in the fullness of time, continue to make your social metric effort more and more sophisticated. But as we see increasingly, various kinds of service providers and nonprofits and institutions are developing methodology, none of them perfect really, but all of them now are sensitizing nonprofit management and social enterprise management to the need to do this. The first step is education of the social sector to gain buy-in that this is an important thing to be doing. Over time, it seems to me it will be an indispensable thing to be doing, and we talk to all of our clients about this, each in its own way, based upon its respective mission and its capacity to move ahead on this front and demonstrate thought leadership. All of our clients are encouraged to include thought leadership in their mission, whatever their stated mission may be. So to the extent they can demonstrate good practices, better practices, best practices in this area and all others, to the extent they can demonstrate innovation and entrepreneurship, others will take note, others will follow suit, and that leverage itself will have enormous societal value over time. Bert-Ola, I see you have vanished. I hope you are going to return shortly, or I may commandeer your microphone and just speak extemporaneously on any topic of my choice. I would start fielding questions if I had access to what they were, and unfortunately I don't, so we'll have to await Bert-Ola's return, which I hope will be prompt. So thanks everyone for your patience. Bert-Ola, I see you're back.
Great, finally. Again. I don't know. I not there, but I think you explained the impact measurement part as well. And also we had another question here about Are you there?
I am. Do you hear me?
Yes, perfect, perfect.
Good.
And also we had another question here that we can take before we end today. It's about if you're an entrepreneur and want to start a social driven, what advices would you give if you're a non-profit would
Bert-Ola,
like
I'm
to,
sorry, you broke up. Could you please repeat the question?
if you're a non-profit or an entrepreneur who would like to start a mission-driven venture, what suggestions would you give to them if you want to yeah, to develop an idea into a business like this?
Yeah, well, I see no distinction between launching a social enterprise and launching any other business, except a social enterprise is tougher to launch and tougher to be successful. So I think you need to go through the same business planning process, but understand your success will be measured against two different criteria. One, financial, to ensure that you have viability and ultimately sustainability, and the other is to ensure that you will have social impact. So, you know, I would give you the same advice I would give any would-be entrepreneur in terms of testing your model against criteria. And business planning today can be the lean startup, or can be something more complicated in terms of a traditional business plan. To put in a little plug for my book, The Mission-Driven Venture, we have an entire chapter on that very subject of how you evaluate your readiness for a business, particularly a social enterprise, what steps to go through from the embryonic business idea all the way through launch. So the book may be of some utility to the person who raised that question. I hope so.
Do you have the book there so we can see it?
Well, thank you for asking. I can, let's see, does this work?
Yeah, it should work if you just hold it up. And maybe you can show a little bit about the different chapters. Well, we can't see it now. You need to raise it a little bit. Can you raise it? Yeah, perfect, perfect. Yeah, perfect.
Going the wrong way. Okay. There you go.
Yeah, perfect. The Mission-Driven Venture.
Yes. And it's available on Amazon and similar on online vendors.
It's great speaking to you, Mark, and I hope you will be part of next year's. We are starting in 2016 year's impact journey, and that will go on around the world in different places.
Well, you can be assured of my contribution to the extent of my ability. I'm a great fan of all that you do, Bert-Ola. I'm very grateful for your extraordinary leadership. And please know, anything I can do to help the cause, I'm for you. I do want to tell anyone who may still be on the webinar that if anyone has any questions we did not get to, please feel free to email me. It's mlane, that's M-L-A-N-E, at markjlane, markjlane.com, mlane@markjlane.com. And I'll be happy to answer any questions offline, should you have any, and we didn't have the time to get to them. And I'm very grateful for everyone's participation, and I wish you all well and happy holidays.
Yeah, great. We will follow up there in the social media spaces and collect various questions and come back.
Thank you,
happy
Bert-Ola.
holidays and Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, my friends. Take care now.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.